Hello and welcome to our Insight60's webinar summer series again. My name is Stephen Shield and I'm the External Relationships Director here at the OGTC. I'll be your host for today. We're delighted to have roughly, I think, about 95 people joining us on the webinar today, and it's great to have you all. I can see a few people are still joining as we speak. So, Insight60, what's this all about? Well, what it is 60 minutes of insightful and interactive discussion, really. We've invited leaders and industry experts to join us on this series to really talk about some of the challenges and the many solutions emerging to face those challenges, to help us guide us through the whole energy transition setup. So, how it works, we've got 30 minutes of keynote presentation from our speaker. You'll then hear from a panel who I'll introduce to you. They've all seen the exam questions, so to speak, and so we'll be well prepared to to comment on the presentation or ask a question. And then the forum is ours, really, for 20 minutes to steer the conversation, the discussion, and to ask questions directly of the speaker. Remember, this session is designed to be interactive, so please use the opportunity, come forward with your questions for David, use the chat function, and I'll call on you to speak. And if you're not comfortable speaking, I'll read your question out. There's a housekeeping slide now that you can see. What I'll do is pause for a second and let you read that. The only thing that I'll say to emphasize is that we are recording this session today, so be mindful of that. If you don't wish to be recorded, you could always drop out. So with that in mind, let me welcome our speaker for today, David Miller. David, welcome to Insight60. Can you give the audience at home just a wee introduction on who you are, what you do here at the OGTC?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. David Miller. I'm the Technology Accelerator Director at the OGTC. Been here pretty much since the beginning of the centre, and was taken on board to help set up the Early Stage Accelerator Programme. So we run a number of programs, but our main one is our accelerator for early stage technology companies focused on the energy sector. We select the very best, most exciting of those companies and take them through an intense 16-week program and onwards towards field trial and ultimately commercialization into the industry.
Super. Well, I'm sure everyone's really keen to hear what you have to say about clean tech. So with no further ado, I will hand over to you, David. Take it away.
Thanks, Stephen, and good morning to everybody. The talk today is around the rise of clean tech. So we're going to take you on a bit of a whirlwind tour of the clean tech sector from its early years to present day, trends from ecosystems around the world, and whether we're at a true turning point for clean tech and the climate, and if so, how we can maximize that opportunity ahead of us. So since becoming a dad 4.5 years ago, I have been a complete and utter emotional wreck. I can't even watch Disney films these days without tearing up. It's pretty ridiculous. I think having a child has definitely made me reassess my purpose in life and definitely reassess the world all around me for sure. And I think there's nothing more leveling or more humbling than having kids, no matter who you are. They bring the strongest and toughest to their knees, even billionaires. So who here on the call has seen a billionaire cry? Not your everyday occurrence for sure. But my first crying billionaire was in 2007, and his name was John Doerr. John Doerr is a former Intel exec turned tech entrepreneur and then investor, and he backed the likes of Amazon, Google, and Twitter in their early years, and is of course now a multi-billionaire. In 2007, John gave a TED talk called Salvation and Profit in Green Tech, and he gives an emotional view of the world to come and the importance of green tech, as it was called in those days. He is famously quoted as saying in his TED talk, "I don't think we're going to make it," before he then breaks down in tears live on stage. A few weeks previously, his teenage daughter had told him that it was up to him and his generation to fix global warming, since they were the ones that had caused it. And after John detailed how the public and private sectors had so far failed to address this, he implored the audience and his billionaire peers to step up and help change the world and reduce the demand on fossil fuels. 2007 became boomtown for green tech and the climate. It was supposed to be the turning point. Just weeks earlier, Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth had won an Oscar for Best Documentary, and interest in climate change had never been higher. And as the US economy recovered from the dual shocks of the internet bubble and 9/11, Doer's fellow Silicon Valley investors were looking to clean technology as the next big thing. They were now ready to make Silicon Valley the Saudi Arabia of clean energy. If we look at investment in the clean tech space, in 2005 it was around the tens of millions of dollars in terms of investment. By 2006 it rose to hundreds of millions of dollars, and then in 2007, the year of that TED Talk, it was over $1 billion of investment. By 2008, a year after Doer's speech, it leapt to over $3.5 billion. The US federal government then followed pretty quickly after and directed roughly $44.5 billion into the sector. Then it all came crashing down. The bubble burst, investors recoiled at their huge losses, and the fallout hit almost every niche in the clean tech sector. It's been 13 years since that inspiring and emotional TED Talk from John and the burst of the clean tech bubble. And unfortunately, we are not much further forward in terms of clean tech in the grand scale of things, but we are much further forward in terms of our climate crisis. So fast forward to 2019, and it was the year of Greta. A young schoolgirl passionate about climate change, she addressed the United Nations and famously scowled at Donald Trump. She brought the climate crisis into everyone's front room. Move into 2020, and this year was penned as the year for true climate action. We were due to see ambitions raised under the Paris Agreement, followed by a review of progress at the annual COP26 summit in Glasgow. Now all that is postponed, and attention is focused on saving lives due to a global pandemic and rescuing stuttering economies in the midst of the world's worst recession since the 1930s. COVID-19 has seen the largest reduction in annual CO2 emissions ever recorded, with factories shuttered and mobility greatly reduced around the world. However, these will likely rebound and ultimately have a negligible impact on atmospheric CO2 levels and warming, and it's these long-term trajectories that really matter most. So the term green recovery has started to come into our vocabulary and is becoming vitally important to bring both economic return, but one that embraces the climate and makes our tough targets more attainable. In many countries, including our own, governments are now looking towards recovery as the pandemic's first wave slowly recedes, with plans for economic stimulus worth trillions and trillions of dollars. Emissions are beginning to rebound, and huge stimulus plans will have consequences for CO2 emissions if they do not explicitly target climate change. So a green recovery is hugely important. Absolutely, it's a real complex space, and initiatives are going to be needed across multiple areas and sectors for sure, but technology is an important factor across many of them. If we enact a green recovery properly, this could be our turning point. This could be the true rise of clean tech. So what is clean tech? Well, like the term digital, it's pretty broad and encompasses many different technologies and sectors. But in short, clean technology can be classified as any process, product or service that reduces negative environmental impacts through significant energy efficiency improvements, the sustainable use of resources, or environmental protection activities. So there's a lot in that. But as you can see in the slide, there's some examples of everyday things that we know are clean tech related. Different vehicle types now, different fuel types. We have different power sources from solar and wind. We also have a lot going on in the recycling space now, particularly in the plastics market. And there are a lot of new products that we can now put into our own homes to make them much more energy efficient. The clean tech market is huge and still growing. You could call it a rising tide market. Sorry for the pun. But the global market is said to be around £2 trillion and growing. And the UK clean tech market is said to be around £50 billion. But that's just 2.5% of the global market. And I think we can do much, much better than that. I'd like to think we could at least triple that if we grasp the opportunity that is ahead of us. But let's take a look at some of the gaps that we have in the technologies we need to meet our climate targets. This is a graph from the recent IEA report that came out this year. And it shows the sorts of technologies and their impact on emissions reduction from 2020 on the left of the graph through to 2070 on the right. If you look at the top two shaded areas, the blue and green areas show technologies that are currently at early adoption stage. They're pretty mature and getting implemented, but not yet scaled, and will ultimately account for around 40% of all emissions reduced by 2070. The yellow and orange parts show the tech that doesn't quite exist or is super early and will account for around 35% of emission reductions to 2070. In the report, they highlight key technology focus areas in terms of electrification, carbon capture, utilization and storage, low carbon hydrogen, low carbon fuels, and bioenergy. But many of the technologies in the blue and the green areas still have technological and economic challenges, and we'll need an influx of new technologies to help accelerate them forward and bring in the new stuff that we need. This means that we need to supercharge the entrepreneurship space in the clean tech area. However, these entrepreneurs stepping into this space face a big challenge. This graph gives you an idea of how long it takes to get particularly hardware or industrial technology to market. In oil and gas, a rule of thumb historically has been it's 10 to 15 years to get new technology commercialized and scaled. Although we are seeing some of those times now reduced considerably through the work that we're doing at the Oil and Gas Technology Centre. But if we take the example of electric vehicles powered by lithium-ion batteries in the middle there, that's taken 30 years to get to market and scale. Solar has taken even longer. We have learned a lot since these technologies are becoming part of our everyday lives, but we need to drastically reduce the R&D and commercialization cycle times if we want any chance of meeting our climate goals. So we have a good appreciation of the challenge ahead of us. So who's cracking on in this space? Well, London, Berlin and Paris have undoubtedly driven the boom in European technology. London's $25 billion companies alone are reportedly worth a cumulative $60 billion. But despite the advantages that these vast tech ecosystems generate, the biggest increase in private funding in 2018 were in Spain, Italy, Belgium and Denmark. Of the 5 largest European IPOs by exit value in 2018, 4 came from non-hub cities around the continent. For example, the world-famous Spotify began life in Stockholm as a startup. And there are many other big tech firms being founded in the likes of Amsterdam and Prague. Tech success in these non-hub European cities have continued as a trend through 2019 and 2020, with significant numbers of non-traditional tech hub locations generating unicorn-level valuations in their startups. So those are startups worth over $1 billion or more. The number of world-leading companies being founded in cities like Stockholm, Madrid, and Amsterdam means investors that are looking for 10 times or even 100 times return on their investments are looking beyond the traditional hubs of London, Berlin, and Paris. It's with ever-increasing likelihood that the next billion-dollar tech company will be founded outside of these big hubs. In the Startup Genome Report in 2019, they were quoted as saying there will be no next Silicon Valley, but there will be 30 of them. So if you have a look at the European ecosystem and this cap of around 4 billion in ecosystem value, which is seen as a critical threshold, between 2014 and 2016, there were 29 ecosystems across Europe that breached this threshold of 4 billion in ecosystem value. Looking at 2016 to 2019, there were 46 ecosystems creating that level of economic impact through their startups. And it's predicted in the next 10 years, there will be hundreds of cities that will cross that 4 billion threshold. So we're definitely in a time of tech boom across Europe. These are pretty impressive and encouraging stats in the general tech sector. But what about the all-important clean tech space? Well, Startup Genome also focused on the clean tech ecosystems and ranked 135 global ecosystems across 6 key factors. They were performance, funding, experience and knowledge, talent, focus, and legacy. The top 3, unsurprisingly at number 1, we have Silicon Valley coming out on top. But surprisingly, number 2 is Amsterdam, and even more surprisingly, certainly for me, Houston is at number 3, with London and New York making up the rest of the top 5. So it's really great to see that the UK is featuring in the global top 5 from a clean tech standpoint. So let's take a little bit of a detailed look into the UK. Well, we're a country of 66 million people, and London holds just 10 million of that populace. So what other cities are starting to make their move from a general technology standpoint? Well, in a list of 100 emerging ecosystems globally, the UK has 5 entries. Manchester and Liverpool jointly together at number 9. Bristol is in at number 13. Edinburgh and Glasgow are at 41. Birmingham at 45. And Durham at 71. So again, this is really encouraging to see. But these are emerging tech ecosystems and not necessarily clean tech focused. In fact, apart from London, clean tech is not a core focus for these ecosystems, with digital, fintech and health tech and other more digital sectors taking their particular attention. We do have a clean tech cluster in Cambridge and London. They connect innovators, corporates, academics and SMEs as well as investors, and they're definitely positioning themselves as a global hub for clean tech innovation. So with Cambridge and London leading the way south of the border on clean tech, what about Scotland? Where are the clean tech hubs supporting our pool of pioneering clean tech startups? Well, we have this exciting development in Dundee. This is the old Michelin tire factory. It opened in 1971 and produced over 300 million tires in its lifetime, which is just amazing, phenomenal number. And it will now become the Michelin Scotland Innovation Park, and will have a sustainable mobility and low carbon accelerator being run by Elevator UK. And it's great to have the Elevator CEO, Professor Gary McEwen, on our panel later. This facility is designed to underpin Scotland's response to the global climate emergency, and its aim is to support entrepreneurs who've developed product designs, prototypes, or possess investor-ready solutions focused on green projects, but it will be heavily slanted towards mobility. So what about the energy sector and the energy transition? Energy supply and usage is a key element in tackling climate change and CO2. Aberdeen is the home of the UK oil and gas industry, and it has been since the late 1960s. We have a population of just over 200,000 people, but we have always punched above our weight. So what is Aberdeen doing about its transition in response to the climate emergency? Well, we have Europe's largest fleet of hydrogen buses, and we have other utility vehicles already coming online. And the new TechX facility has the UK's largest installation of a hydrogen fuel cell. The Council have recently announced its goal to be a net zero city by enacting a green recovery from COVID-19 and the downturn in the oil and gas industry. So a key factor in this will be supporting and accelerating the energy transition of the oil and gas industry. As we pursue this energy transition, we will see oil and gas revenues decline from around 24 billion in 2020 to around 11 billion in 2050, shown by these bubbles here. However, if we can become the hub that supports the development, deployment and export of key technologies in this space, such as supporting net zero operations, renewables, hydrogen and carbon capture, there's a huge opportunity ahead of us. If we look at offshore renewables as an example, we see around 2 billion in terms of revenue generation in 2020. We expect that to increase to around 16 billion in 2050. From a hydrogen production standpoint, we expect that to be a potential of around 13 billion by 2050, and carbon capture and storage, again, around about 9 billion by 2050. So for those math whiz amongst you in terms of adding that up, that's a huge £49 billion opportunity up for grabs if we get this right. And I truly believe Scotland can be at the centre of this technology revolution. We know we have gaps in the tech that we need, and the pipeline needs to be much, much bigger. So if we take a look at the investment data for 2019, these are all global investment deals done from early stage seed through to Series A+. Just 4% of these were clean tech. And of those 4%, encouragingly, the majority of those technologies were energy related if you break them down. While 4% is disappointing and not very impressive, it does represent a huge opportunity to drastically increase this by supercharging the ecosystem and the pipeline. One of the pipelines to supply the tech, not the only one, but one of them is TechX. And this is the early stage accelerator at the Oil and Gas Technology Centre. TechX is a venture builder, i.e. we create new companies from scratch. We are also an accelerator and an incubator. And we are working hard to try and build all the stepping stones an energy-focused startup will need to be commercially successful. And at the OGTC, generally, we have already been active in the net zero space and covering the likes of autonomous and alternative power sources for the industry, as well as some of the early stage offshore hydrogen development work. And at TechX, we're already seeing a huge shift in the tech startups that are applying for the programme. Our application pool this year for cohort 3 was over 150 companies from 35 different countries. 50% clean tech companies, that was made up of 50% clean tech companies compared to just 28% 2 years ago. Our cohort 3 starts in a couple of weeks and half of them are clean tech focused. So of the 6 in this year's cohort, 4 of them have come out of the Venture Builder programme with Deep Science Ventures and a further 2 from the open selection process round. These technologies cover everything from a unique plastic enzyme to improve recyclability of plastics, to next generation hydrogen tech, direct air carbon capture machines, and ceramic multi-fuel engines. We're all really excited about getting stuck with all 12 companies this year in a few weeks' time, because they all represent the future of our industry. But what else are we missing? If we want to supercharge this clean tech pipeline for the energy transition, what do we need? Well, Gary and myself and others in the ecosystem discuss this regularly, and we tend to agree that there are three key building blocks to create a thriving ecosystem: people, support, and funding. We clearly have some great people in the northeast of Scotland. We have a huge knowledge base and a world-class supply chain already supporting an international sector. We have a highly skilled workforce and transferable skills, and the region has a proud history of innovation and invention. There is a legacy of entrepreneurship here that is here to support the next generation and the next. And with the current downturn, we do expect to see a boom of entrepreneurship over the next few years. If we want to hang on to these tech pioneers, then we need to offer them something that they cannot get elsewhere. Our ecosystem here in the Northeast is growing rapidly, with more and more support coming on stream. If we take a look at some of the organisations involved in our ecosystem, we've got 2 world-class universities, and we have a number of entities supporting companies at different stages, from Small Business Gateway to Scottish Enterprise, Elevator, ourselves at the OGTC. We also have one Codebase as well. We then look at some of the corporate partners that we have supporting us, with the likes of BP and Equinor and KPMG, and we have some specialist skill set support in the areas of data labs and census, to name a few. And we're really excited that we have a new angel syndicate also set up to support some of the early stage investment required for these companies. We work hugely collaboratively as an ecosystem and continue and always discuss what more we can do to improve the offering, but we do still have some gaps, particularly when it comes to specialist facilities. Many of our startups, particularly those in this year's cohort, require access to labs, makerspace, warehousings, and workshops. And we look at some of the best facilities around the world, shown in some of these pictures. They all provide these in an integrated ecosystem. They build a community for accelerating technology. These integrated ecosystems reduce startup overheads, they increase efficiency and collision factors between founders, which adds huge value for their development and ultimately accelerates technology development. We don't really have anything like this in support of the energy sector, not yet anyway. And as an ecosystem, we're continually looking at how we can provide such facilities to strengthen our offer even more. So the next factor is funding. This is a big gap in our ecosystem. Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the standard funding phases for startup. This graph illustrates it pretty well. And the majority of our startups, certainly in the TechX program, are all in the seed capital phase on the left, in this kind of pinky orange area, in what's known as the dreaded valley of death. The size of this valley greatly varies dependent on whether you're potentially a core digital company or somebody that's looking to develop hardware and industrial tech. For the more hardware industrial tech type technologies, this can be 10+ years before you get out of this valley and is more akin to biotech timeframes. So access to early stage funding is a key factor in an ecosystem's ability to attract and retain companies while they accelerate and grow. We have good availability of early stage Series A and B investors, but there is a huge gaping hole in the seed capital market in the northeast of Scotland and the energy sector in particular. This is usually filled by angel investors, but we don't have an active angel network in Aberdeen equivalent to the likes of Edinburgh and Glasgow. We do have a new syndicate in Alba Equity, but it's early days for them, and we do need more scale if we plan to supercharge the pipeline in this space. Angel investment in capital-intensive tech is a really tough ask. Capital-intensive technology can require millions of pounds just to commercialize and start generating revenue. There's a real risk that an angel's early high-risk investment gets diluted considerably at later stages by the much larger rounds from VCs needed to commercialize the tech. In other words, angels would take all the risk early on and do all the hard work to have then their return reduced at exit. So many of them tend to shy away. If we look at the companies coming out of TechX and the OGTC, we've got 21 companies from cohort 1 and cohort 2 with a combined gross value add potential of over £3 billion. We also have 200+ projects going through the OGTC with a gross value add potential of £18 billion, and we're only 3 years into our 10-year journey. Post OGTC support, so post our funding and successful field trial, on average, most early stage companies will then look to raise a £1 to £2 million seed round to finalise their development and get to market. Sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. Many of our startups have successfully raised private investment, but not from this region. If we look to supercharge the pipeline and hold on to these companies, we need a seed capital market in the hundreds of millions of pounds. With this type of funding, it would be transformational for the region. We could see the creation of hundreds of new jobs. Don't get me wrong, deals do get done in this early phase, but not at the volume that we may need if we grow the pipeline. Without substantial funding at this early stage, we are pushing these companies towards a funding cliff edge. If they cannot raise money to commercialise and scale, we will never realise the GVA of over £20 billion that we have ahead of us, and a GVA that this region desperately needs. Of those companies at the cliff edge, some will falter, unfortunately. Many will simply choose to relocate to where the money is, and we are seeing this happen already. And while it's great these companies are getting funded and progressing, it's disappointing that the region is missing out on the opportunity in terms of jobs. But we have the power to change this. I believe out of crisis and chaos comes opportunity. I think 2020 is absolutely our turning point and is our catalyst to make change truly happen as we implement our green recovery and move forward. I, for one, absolutely want to see Aberdeen on that list of emerging ecosystems from around the world. Could we be one of the next Silicon Valleys? Absolutely, why not? With the right ambition and drive, anything is possible. We have always punched above our weight as a region, and we must continue to do so. And I really believe the future is bright and clean for the energy sector, but not without a thriving ecosystem behind it. We are continuing to focus our efforts around the key three factors from an ecosystem standpoint, leveraging the amazing people, knowledge and talent we have, as well as attracting new talent to the Northeast. We must continue to enhance our support offering even further, especially for the more complex technologies, and look to provide more specialised facilities and build integrated communities. More work must also be done around funding. We simply cannot sit by and watch as our startups follow the investment they need to other ecosystems around the world. We are at real risk of just becoming the loading point for new tech as it gets deployed into the UKCS instead of its home. However, if we get this right, we can truly transform this region and grab a stake of this multi-billion pound opportunity. We can make Scotland synonymous with new tech development and deployment and become the home of clean tech that benefits not just our region and country, but the world as a whole. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, David. Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah.
Yeah, super. That was really stimulating. Lots of really interesting facts and figures in there, and a call to action at the end, which I'm very interested to hear how we're all going to respond to. At this stage, what I'd like to do is introduce our panel. We have a very small but perfectly formed panel this morning. Let me start off with introducing Luca Carrari. Luca is our Innovation Network Director here at OGTC and works across the whole of the UK talking to academics and entrepreneurs, has a really good insight into the subject matter you've been talking about today, David. Next, we have Myrtle Dawes. Myrtle is our Solution Centre Director here at the OGTC. Myrtle, if you could turn your camera on, that would be super. Myrtle works with a lot of developers through our Solution Centres and has great insight into this space as well. And last but not least is Professor Gary McEwen, who runs the elevator here in Aberdeen. In his profile, it interestingly tells me that Professor McEwen has been an entrepreneur since the age of 5, and the first product that he sold were bumblebees. Quite an interesting fact. Anyway, panel, welcome. I'm sure you have comments or questions on David's presentation, so please do fire away.
David, I will break the ice and start with the first one. You mentioned somehow the challenge of having a definition of what clean tech is. Like digital is very broad and wide, and you know I hate silos and definition might bring that element, but sometimes taxonomy is important in terms of measuring how an industry or sector is growing, and also measuring how much funding is getting, which is probably this is the case. But I wonder, can we do something better in defining it, and also defining in a way that doesn't create those silos? And I'm thinking, is a clean tech anything that reduces emissions, or it depends on the intention? Just to make some example, many digital innovations, or the world of digital with the Internet of Things, or even digital communication we're having now, has a side effect of reducing travel and therefore reducing emissions. But would you classify Zoom as clean tech, or augmented reality as a clean tech, or does it need to be the main point of the technology is about reducing emission? And maybe that's the case for Zoom as well.
Talk about a tough question for the first one, Luca. Thanks for that. So yeah, I mean, I think we see that a lot in the work that we're doing, right? I mean, we're working with our developers to try and help find some net zero angles to some of the technologies that wouldn't inherently be classified as net zero or clean tech. And it's becoming much more important that the technologies that are being supported generally are those that are technologies for good, or technologies for the planet. So yeah, I mean, I think from a Zoom perspective, I guess we've all been forced into utilizing Zoom with lockdown and the various other things that are going on just now. So yeah, it does help us rethink, I guess, the future of work from that standpoint. So where many of us would have been down in London for various meetings with government officials and things like that, much of that now can be done via Zoom. The technology is there. It's not necessary to travel for a lot of these meetings now, and reduce the carbon footprint overall of a lot of the things that generally happens in the world of business. People are flying all over the place. You hear these stories of people flying to Houston for a couple of meetings, arrive in the morning, leave in the afternoon and come back again. And a lot of that, I think, is now unnecessary and could be seen as, there could be a negative tag against those kind of behaviors going forward as we look to enact the green recovery. That comes with a certain behavior change, and leveraging the types of technology like Zoom. You wouldn't necessarily classify Zoom as a green technology straight off the bat, but it's an enabler to allow us to become more green in terms of how we conduct our business.
Thanks, Luca, for that great question. Very tough one to kick us off. I think I'll come to Myrtle next. Myrtle, have you any comments or questions for David?
Yes, thank you, David. That was excellent. And I wish I was an entrepreneur rather than an engineer, but maybe too late for me. But I was interested in the graph that you showed in terms of where we are in terms of the technology, certainly that we need over the next 50 years. And from an entrepreneur or an innovator perspective, in terms of attracting funding, how easy it is to attract funding for something that you are innovating existing technology, so it's a bit more tangible, as opposed to going for something quite disruptive?
Yeah, it's a good question. So you've got two dynamics at play there. You've got the existing technologies that we know we've got technology gaps in, and some of the economics are challenging, and we potentially need people to come in and take them apart and find a way forward where we've got those gaps. Some of that will come through, I guess, the R&D institutions, universities that are already supporting these technologies, and people with incredibly big brains will be picking apart that and trying to find a way forward with the research they're doing, and the universities are good at producing spin-outs that will help enhance those technologies. But I guess we've seen the landscape of technology change with the likes of Amazon and Google and others coming along that are taking on very established markets, just saying, I think that we can do something much different, much better. The FTSE 500, FTSE 250 has changed considerably over the last 10 to 20 years. Used to be full of big pharma, big tobacco, big oil, is now full of your Amazons and your Apples and stuff. So there is definitely a big transition coming, and I think people are almost expecting, where's the next new tech coming from? Where's the next entrepreneur? What's the next big thing? Because we have seen so much disruption over the last 10 to 15 years. But I think now there's more focus and appetite in the clean tech space. It's, I think in 2005 to 2010, when we had the green tech bubble in the US, I just don't think there were the markets. I think there are lots of good ideas and a lot of money spent on new technologies, but the world maybe just wasn't ready for them. There wasn't the precipice that we now find ourselves on that is now becoming important that we do something about that. So it's unfortunate we have to be in that situation to drive that forward, but that is the situation that we're in. But we're certainly seeing the narrative change in our own industry and in others. And we only have to look at agriculture and the water industry and various others. There's a huge boom from a clean tech standpoint, which is really exciting to see.
Thank you.
Thanks, Myrtle. Thanks, David. Good to come to Gary. Gary, you're our resident entrepreneur expert here, so your perspective would be you're most welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. And David, that was an excellent talk, and I echo this notion of Aberdeen and our region becoming the home of clean tech, because that is a real opportunity. But I'm trying to kind of condense this question into something that's shortish, but just bear with me for a second. When you look at the likes of, I'm thinking about the market, and you look at the likes of Oman, for instance, who look likely to run out of oil perhaps in the next 20, 25 years or so. And so they've got massive issues along with Saudi around, you know, they've got visibility now on the end of oil, but they have no water to drink. And so they are investing massively in desalination and solar energy to do that, nuclear energy to do that. So their diversion off to clean tech is very much driven by an impetus that people have to drink water. In China, they have exactly the same thing, where their impetus is actually about, it's not really about climate change, it's about helping their citizens actually get a clean breath of air when they're in a city. So that's what drives them. And so I always, when I think about the entrepreneur, come back to what's driving the market. And then even if you mentioned the Michelin plant down in Dundee, but again, that wasn't some grand plan. That was Michelin one day deciding they weren't going to be in Dundee, which presented an opportunity, which is slightly worrying because it's not part of a grand plan. And so it brings us back to Aberdeen and what is it going to do? Because, you know, it's not a given that we'll become the centre of clean tech just because of our oil and gas credentials. There's many cities and countries in the world who are chasing this goal. And while we might see a connection to our heritage in engineering, nobody else sees that outside of Aberdeen. And so the question really is, you know, what is the impetus? What is the impetus that will bring about this clean tech hub within Aberdeen? What needs to happen for that to happen?
Yeah, another big question. Thanks for that, Gary. So yeah, I mean, I think it's I guess the answer is as complex as the question, I guess. So yeah, when we break it down to the three key factors that you and I discuss on a regular basis around the people, the support, and the funding. We've got great people, we've got good support here, and there's more we can do in that space, and we recognise our strengths and our weaknesses, and are trying to work together to do that. But it's not always the case that build and they will come. There's other things that you also need to have in place. Funding is a key factor of that. So we could have the best facilities, the best ecosystem here in the Northeast, all wanting to do great things in clean tech, but if we can't provide funding mechanisms from seed all the way through to Series A, these companies are just going to uproot and go elsewhere. And we've seen that with companies that we've engaged with. We've seen that with a couple of companies that we work with, that they are unable to raise money here and are now looking at locations elsewhere because that's where the potential investment is. And those ecosystems are the ones that will benefit from them as they grow. So it's multifaceted. I think there's an element of ambition as well. I think there's a piece of, what do we desire to become from an Aberdeen, northeast of Scotland standpoint? Silicon Valley was a dust bowl. It was known more for its oranges and lemons than it was for chips and technology. But they started with an ambition. They had some big companies that took seat, and they grew the ecosystem from there. We already have a market here. We have an ecosystem. We have a supply chain, and we have access to the North Sea. We've got a lot of things that tick the box. There's things that we don't have, and we know about those, but I do think there's an ambition piece of setting our flag out of this is who we want to be and what we want to become, and this is all the great things that we have. Here's some success stories of what we have done with technology and how we've accelerated it and taken that 10 to 15 year down to 3 year, and they're commercializing and scaling, and I think those success stories will attract more people. But if we don't have the other hooks, we're at risk of bringing them here for a short period of time for them to fly off and go somewhere else. So it's a complex space, but I think we know the areas that we need to work on. But I do think this ambition piece is part of that we need to set our stall out a bit more in terms of who we desire to become as a region and what we want to be.
Great, thank you, Gary and David. All I have to say, David, is you better strap yourself into your chair because we've got some really killer questions popping up here. And the panel have warmed up nicely, but I'm going to come back to Luca before we go to discussion. Luca, you want to add a comment here before we move on?
Yeah, I think that was a fantastic question from Gary, and maybe one additional comment to what David said is, or maybe reinforcing what he said, is that why here? I think what we have here is, and it should be, and has to be, a purpose. And I think the advantage we have here is the oil and gas industry, the central oil and gas industry, and the challenge to decarbonize the oil and gas industry first, to make it cleaner, and the way it produces is hydrocarbon. And second, in managing the energy transition from the industrial ecosystem of oil and gas into this integrated energy that was represented in that chart that David showed. I think this should be the drivers for us. We have a great place to do this transition and to decarbonize the oil and gas industry here. That's what the best place to invest in clean tech to do that.
Okay, thank you, Luca. So with that, I am now going to unleash the fury that is the questions, David. Prepare yourself. I'd like to go to Clara Altabel first. Clara, if you can hear us, would you like to pose your questions directly to David, please?
Hi, David. Thanks for your presentation. Very interesting. I did notice on your slide showing the Tech Pioneers that they were all men. Could this be one of the reasons why we're struggling to get funding and to stay relevant?
It's a great question, Clara, and one that we recognised all the way back at cohort 1. So gender diversity is a challenge across the tech sector globally. You add oil and gas dynamic to that, and it's an even worrying picture. Looking at our gender diversity stats from cohort 1 through to cohort 3, about 8% of our applications in cohort 1 were from female founders and co-founders. That did increase to about 18% for cohort 3, but as you see in our final cohort, none of the final companies have female founders or co-founders. We have actually kicked off a stream of work, a program called TechX, which is purely focused around the female founder challenge. We have a number of programs that we're currently raising some funds for to support, to see what more we can do to identify where these potential female founders are, encourage more to come out and start businesses, and give them the support to help them drive their business forward in a more flexible way, and to help de-risk, etc. So we've done a lot of work being led by our CEO Colette, and we have a task force engaged with numerous partners providing support. And we do have a lofty ambition in that space. So once we kick off the program next year, in the next 5 years, starting from next year, we are hoping that half of our TechX portfolio will have gender diverse teams. So we're taking action in that space, but it is a big challenge. We recognize and we know that actually if you can bring in gender diverse teams, they perform better, they grow better, and they also provide more return on investment for investors in those companies. So there's big economic drivers to do more in this space, and it's something we are getting after.
Super. Clara, I think you've got a follow-on question from that. Do you want to just pose it right now?
Yeah, the other question was about sort of profit mechanisms, and a lot of startups now are classing themselves as social enterprises, and they give back a big share of their profits into a social enterprise, be it climate action or a local social project. Are your clean tech companies positioning themselves in that way, or is it a purely make profits for shareholders and the traditional oil and gas way?
I mean, I think there's a mix. I mean, I think some of the traditional business models are obviously still there, but this concept of business for good is very much coming through, and we're seeing a lot more companies in that space that are doing profit sharing mechanisms, or spending a portion of their money to plant more trees or to give back to communities. So it is an element that we do encourage in our startups. Particularly, we have a good opportunity with them because they're so early stage. They're all at prototype or pre-prototype stage. So there's a lot of opportunity to get in and influence things like business models. I mean, ultimately, the old school of, if I'm going to invest in your company, I expect a certain percentage of return is very much still there. But there are more newer investors coming in that are not necessarily driven by just that. They also want to see some of that going back into communities or larger scale, clean tech programs, or planting trees or doing things like that. So it is a challenge, but it is something that we recognize and something that we do encourage our startups to look at as they're building their business models.
Thank you, Clara. Gary, I'm conscious of the fact that you deal with entrepreneurial startups all the time, so the gender balance issue must be something that you have to constantly work on to make sure that we get it right. What's your take on this?
Yeah, maybe just combine that with a comment about the entrepreneurial health of our segment of Scotland and Aberdeen City and Shire, because David mentioned that we are a very entrepreneurial region, and we absolutely are. We routinely produce around 15% of all of Scotland's startups, despite only having about 8% of Scotland's population. And that's not replicated by any other city in the country. So that's a very healthy, that's been the case for probably 5 or 6 years. In the last 3 years, interestingly, the number of female-led entrepreneurial businesses in the City and Shire have been more than 50%. Again, it's not a figure that is replicated across the country, but for some reason, it's not a blip. It's been the last 3 or 4 years probably. We've had about 52% of our regional entrepreneurs are female-led, which is great. Our advisory teams are perhaps about 70% female advisors too. We try and replicate so we have that diversity of support. And so we are healthy generally from an entrepreneurial standpoint, and we're also very healthy in terms of our gender balance in this region.
Thank you, Gary. I'm going back to the audience now. I'd like to go to Richard Oblath. Richard, if you're there, here's your chance to pose your question to David.
David, thank you. Very, very insightful and in some ways provocative presentation. I've got maybe a difficult question for a southerner to someone from northeast Scotland. I'm a retiree, a recent retiree from Royal Dutch Shell, worked all over the world, including living in Houston. I'm not surprised Houston's an epicenter. Texas is the largest producer of wind energy in the United States, something that's often forgotten. And I think Aberdeen could be the Houston of the UK. My question, though, is, with all the focus of the SNP on independence, is there a risk that you might get isolated from the bigger ecosystem of the UK, where you can attract angel investors from a country of 66 million and some very wealthy people to a smaller entity? Is that a risk that you worry about?
To be honest, I don't think so. I mean, I think ultimately, if we can demonstrate we have exciting companies here that have high growth potential, and there's an opportunity for these individuals to get in early, invest money, and make good returns on them down the line, and they are comfortable that the ecosystem has the capability to hold on to them and do that, why would people not want to come and invest? Market forces would indicate that would be the case. I think our challenge is to show that, one, we have a great ecosystem, we've got great companies, we've got success stories to demonstrate our capability, and that we can attract money not just from the region but also externally to come in and support these companies. So our challenge actually is more around the dynamics of investors at times, that many of them, not all of them, but many of them don't like to travel. If they have deal flow on their doorstep, they prefer to invest in companies that are relatively local to them, because particularly at early stage, they would like to get their hands around them and help as the shaping and molding goes through. I think our challenge is, because we don't have that early stage network in the region at the moment, we either have to build that or we have to attract that. And that's up to us as an ecosystem to sell that, regardless of whether we're independent or part of the UK. That's on us. Again, it's about this ambition and selling point of what we've got going on here, the great companies we've coming through, the opportunities that there are here for investment. Because we have to remember, the ultimate point of investment is, some will be driven to make a difference in the world, but many will be wanting to increase their return on the money that they're investing. So it's up to us to show that we have the companies here that can help them do that. But we've got a lot of work to do in that space, particularly in the early stage. But I don't think it's a factor, not for me anyway.
Thanks, Richard. Let's move on to Anna Savankova. Anna, could you pose your question, please?
Hi, hello, thanks very much. David, thanks for presentation and market size, quite intense to analyze, in a sense that you need to put so many parallels with Silicon Valley. I really like that, that you're saying Aberdeen can be the next one. My question is, obviously the numbers which you put on a last slide about 150 billion opportunity. How much do you expect that to be oil and gas?
So I think the graph I showed earlier, the kind of bubble chart graph in terms of the decline in revenues that we're going to see from oil and gas between now and 2050. There are obviously new markets coming on stream with the likes of hydrogen, CCUS, etc., with potential revenue streams coming through from them. So the overall opportunity potential is around 49 billion, and that's just for this particular sector. So you could say there's potentially a third up for grabs of that 150 billion opportunity. If we're saying the UK is 50 billion at this point in time, which I think those numbers are actually out of date, but they're the only ones that were available. I think the opportunity is much bigger than that. I mean, if you've got a global market size of £2 trillion, we surely can grasp a much larger share of that. So if we're already saying the opportunity for the energy sector is around 50 billion, then there must be other opportunities and other technologies that are maybe not necessarily fitting in those other big buckets. We're going to need lots of other technologies in other spaces that can add additional value on top of that we haven't included in that chart. So I mean, it's a flag in the sand. I think potentially there's triple that opportunity out there, and 150 billion sounded like a good number. I think that's achievable.
All right, thanks very much. And the other part of the question, so you've mentioned, I think some of you mentioned already, that 50% of invention and entrepreneurships come from Aberdeen. That was one of the questions. Is it the startups or the seed accelerators, which you are doing here in Oil and Gas Technology Center, are they mainly coming from Aberdeen or from all over?
So no, I mean, we do support locally. We've got some amazing young companies coming through some of the programs that Gary's organization runs, and we support some of those as well as some of the others. So we do support local. We attract local, national and international applicants. So over 35 countries, and we have companies applying for. When we analyze the 33 companies that we are supporting, so 21 from the last two cohorts and another 12 from this year, 70% of them are not from this region. So a third are from this region, 70% are not. So that shows we're already able to attract companies to this region that are not based here, and working with them to try and understand their future intent. A good chunk of them, 80% of them, are interested in relocating to this region because they see the opportunity here. So there's a huge opportunity, and we're only on cohort 3. We have a 10-year life cycle, so that's well over 100 startups that we potentially could be relocating here to the northeast as they grow and scale and create more jobs. So it's a huge opportunity ahead of us. It's up for the grabbing. It's up to us to take it.
Thank you very much, David. Really
Did tell you they were tough questions, David. We've got a few more. Conscious of time, I think we've got time for maybe about 1 or 2 more questions, plus a couple of comments from the panel. Let's go to Mark Strathy next. Mark, if you're still with us, could you ask your question to David, please?
Yeah, no problem. Cheers, Stephen. Thanks for that presentation, David. Really enjoyed some of the stats and stuff you showed. And one of the things you mentioned that I was curious about was the people aspect. And, we talk a lot about a green recovery right now, but one of my concerns, is where are we getting the people for some of these jobs, because, I mean, we have in Scotland, we already have quite a large skills gap. There's already 13,000 jobs in the digital and tech sector they just cannot fill. So I would envisage similar problems going forward. So I guess my question is, how would you kind of combat some of these issues that we face moving forward? And equally, how do we get people who have perhaps been affected by the kind of COVID crisis into more of these clean tech jobs as well?
Another big question. Thanks, Mark. So, I mean, again, it's a complex space. A lot of this, some of this starts all the way back at school. So when you talk about some of the things that get taught in school, so if you look at digital skills, for an example, in terms of what gets taught in school versus what we need in terms of future skills, there's a gap there. I think that's recognised, and there's a lot more being done by the governments and various things to try and improve that. But all the way through from school through to university courses, better connecting industry into those areas to help decision making, and a clear line of sight between if I choose these subjects or I choose this course, my potential career path is going to be this, or the jobs I potentially could go into are going to be these. And there's a lot more happening in that space. We're very active in that space with schools and colleges and universities. and particularly because of that reason, to try and encourage more people, more talent to come into the industry. But ultimately, you potentially will need to attract, skilled people from elsewhere. We had a talk from Nico, I think the last Insight60, talking about the work they were doing in Rotterdam and the huge work going on around hydrogen infrastructure, carbon capture and storage. And I asked him the same question. Are you leveraging skills that you have in the region, or are you having to bring in external because you don't have those skills? And his answer was it's a mix. And we are able to transfer a lot of the engineering skills, can be transferred, but some of them need to come from elsewhere in terms of hubs that are specializing in that space. But we certainly see a lot of the universities are now offering more courses in this space. There's more technical research going on in this space. So I think it is recognized. I think the digital skills gap is a particularly good one, particularly in the region that we have here. I know that there is an aspiration to build a digital economy here, but it's the same question, well, where are these people coming from? So it's a challenge for sure, but it's a complex solution. But it is something that we recognize, certainly as the OGTC, and something we're heavily active in. Hope that answers your question.
Super, thanks, Mark. Right, Gary, I know you want to build on that question that Mark's just asked, so we'll do that, and then we've got a little surprise before we wrap everything up. So, Gary, over to you.
Yeah, the talent questions are a really important one, because without the talent, it's going to be very difficult. But there was a time in the 90s, I remember, when Scottish Enterprise had tried to dictate the regions of Scotland and what they would major in. So they suggested that Glasgow should be digital, and in fact, digital ended up really in Edinburgh. They didn't suggest Glasgow was to be engineering. They suggested that Dundee was to be something, but it ended up being digital gaming, and now low carbon mobility. So the concept of these ecosystems tend to develop more naturally than they do if you try and make them happen. So we somehow or other need to work out how we make Aberdeen and that region the centre of clean tech. And I think once it becomes that, the talent will then gravitate, because that's what happens. The talent gravitates to the heartbeat of it all. If you want to be involved in clean tech, you have to go to Aberdeen. It becomes a very easy decision. And that's the stage we need to get to. I don't think the talent will be the issue. The issue is grabbing a hold of this space.
That's a very insightful comment. David, have you got anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting when you look into some of the detail around the scoring mechanisms that like a startup Genome do when they're doing these ratings and rankings of the global ecosystems. One of them is around legacy and recirculating talent. And that's around people that have been there, done that with starting new companies, growing them and exiting, so that you can short circuit the path for the next company that's coming along. So these entrepreneurs can go back in and take in a CEO role or take on a board position or mentor. And I think that's one thing that we definitely have going for us in this region, is the entrepreneurial talent that we see here, and Gary kind of touched on that. We have a proud legacy of innovation and invention in this region, and a real strong heart of entrepreneurship. So it's making sure we can hang on to that and making sure that we can recirculate that talent, both the talent that we're seeing go through our programs at the moment that may come out in 6, 7, 8 years and then want to kind of recirculate back in to kind of provide that knowledge and expertise to the next batch. So that's hugely important, as well as the technical talent. We also need that entrepreneurial talent as well.
Great. Well, we literally have about 30 seconds left. So I did say there'd be a wee surprise at the end. David very kindly has asked a question that we're going to put into a form of a poll. So if we're going to pop the poll up on the screen, and if the audience could just digest that question and let us know what you think, that would be super. We'll get the results shortly after, well, immediately. Voting still coming in. I think we're there. So it looks like you've persuaded everyone, David, that yes, we can be the clean tech hub for Scotland and the UK. So that job well done. Now you just have to go on and do it, which is the easy part. Yes. Thanks very much, everyone, for attending Insight60 this morning. It's been a super presentation and discussion. Thank you to all the panelists. Great comments and observations. A very special thank you to Gary for joining us this morning. Really, really great to have your commentary here, Gary, on this topic. So thanks, everyone, and hopefully see you soon for the next Insight60. Stay tuned to social media We'll be revealing our next Insight60 very shortly. It'll be a great one, and we look forward to seeing you there when we meet again. Thank you very much. Bye.